Hey guys, welcome to Film Studies, and we are going to begin today with Unit 1, Part 1, the early years to 1929. And I hope that you all have had a pleasant experience thus far as we transition back into the fall semester. So let's go ahead and get going here. Unit 1, Part 1, the origins of cinema. To understand what the cinema is and how it works, it is important to look at how it took shape. The identity of cinema as an institution remains bound up with the socio-cultural conditions in which it was conceived and developed. The origins of cinema lie in the development of mass communication and technology. So a lot of what we're about to talk about here is going to sound like some of the things that we discussed in some of my history classes, especially when we talk about the technological revolution. The cinema serves as the culmination of an age that saw the invention of the telegraph in 1837, photography roughly from 1826 to 1839. You had various photographic devices being developed. The typewriter in 1873. The telephone in 1876, the phonograph in 1878, roll film in 1880, the Kodak camera in 1888, George Eastman's motion picture film in 1889, Thomas Edison's motion picture camera from 1891 to 1893, Marconi's wireless telegraph in 1895, and the motion picture projector around 1895 as well. So what was the earliest motion picture? Like, what's the very first movie? Well, it's called The Roundhay Garden Scene, and it's an 1888 British short film directed by an inventor named Louis Le Prince. It was recorded at 12 frames per second using a single lens camera and Eastman's paper film. This is the earliest surviving motion picture. He was never able to perform a planned public demonstration in the United States because he mysteriously vanished from a train in September of 1890. So here it is, folks, the Roundhay Garden Scene. Now, you got to look fast because it goes quick, literally like 2 seconds. You ready? The very first motion picture. Wow. Did you catch that? We'll do it once more here. 1888. Once more. Just a couple seconds, but the deleted scenes on the DVD are compelling. But no, really, I think that's just absolutely incredible, folks, to think that that was made in 1888. I believe Benjamin Harrison was president of the United States then. That's just incredible. So there was the man that developed the Roundhay Garden Scene there, Louis Le Prince, and I think that's just incredible. Thomas Edison's invention factory. Thomas Edison, who had played a role in the development of the telegraph, the phonograph, and electricity, used the phonograph as a model for his invention of the motion picture. Edison, however, didn't so much invent as he did produce the very first motion picture camera, the kinetoscope, in 1888. Now, I'm not taking anything away from the savage greatness that is Thomas Edison because, yeah, he was all that and then some. An incredibly brilliant man. The light bulb, electricity, and all that stuff. I mean, he really had a good head on his shoulders. But one of the things that he is given credit for was having invented the kinetoscope, the very first motion picture camera. Well, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with much Civil War photography, but a lot of the most famous pictures in the Civil War, Matthew Brady is given credit for many of those pictures. The problem with that is that Brady had a studio, and he had people that worked for him who would go out and take pictures. And then they would come back to the studio. He would look through what they had taken and then sign his name to it. Ooh, that's a good one. I believe I'll take that one. Good job. And he would pat them on the back and then sign his name to their work and take credit for it. Well, Thomas Edison had a bit of a similar arrangement. He actually had an invention factory and had people working for him, just like Matthew Brady did. And so when people would invent things, he might say, I don't think I want that one, or I don't want my name on that one. And it's Thomas Edison, not Thomas Edition. I see that up there now. My bad. Yeah, he had people working for him that he would have invent things, and sometimes he would like them, sometimes he didn't. I spelled Edison correctly that time. But this guy named W.K.L. Dixon, who was one of his employees in his invention factory, invents the kinetoscope. And Thomas Edison says, well, that's pretty cool. I believe I'll sign my name to that. And that's exactly what he did. Thomas Edison took a bow for W.K.L. Dixon's invention and is wrongly, in many ways, given credit for having invented it. And you can imagine that W.K.L. Dixon was not exactly thrilled about Edison taking a bow for that. There's Dixon right there. The actual execution of Edison's goal of creating an instrument which did for the eye what the phonograph did for the ear was actually accomplished through the effort of Edison's assistant W.K.L. Dixon. The kinetoscope, along with the telegraph, photography, the telephone, the phonograph, and the wireless telegraph, transformed the face of late 19th century culture. Traditional notions of space and distance, which were based in part on how long it took to get from point A to point B, were redefined by the virtually instantaneous transmission of information from one geographic location to another. Photography and the motion picture introduced and institutionalized a new, modern conception of time. Time could now not only be caught, but also infinitely replayed. With still photography, the phonograph, and the motion picture, time became objectified. It could be marketed in the form of photos, records, or movies, and it could be infinitely re-experienced. So, in a way, time travel is possible because what you're seeing whenever you watch film or whenever you look at a photograph is light from a distant star that has been captured and objectified, and in the case of film, can be replayed as many times as you want. In short, the new communication technologies that arose at the end of the 19th century helped to give birth to mass culture and the era of mass consumption, in part by transforming time into a product that could be reproduced and sold. The cinema emerged as the perfect consumer product in that it could give audiences an experience to consume, but also function as a display window for other mass-produced goods. And heaven knows that's a industry in and of itself. Product placement. That's, watch the Super Bowl and look at where, Doritos, how much they pay for ads in the Super Bowl, and Coke, and all these other companies that really spend a great deal of money just for, a few seconds of advertising time during the Super Bowl. Product placement is incredibly important, and, a lot of these companies today, proper product placement and the monies that are paid in order to have their product on screen really helps to finance a lot of the films that are made today. I remember in one of the James Bond movies, I believe it was Casino Royale, but I remember James Bond fans got incredibly upset that James Bond was going to be on camera drinking a beer. It's James Bond. He's supposed to have a vodka martini, shaken not stirred. That was James Bond's signature drink. And the Bond fans were throwing a big fit. And the producer of the film said, well, do you want the movie or not? Because Heineken was giving a ton of money to see James Bond, to have James Bond drink their product. So that's kind of how a lot of movies are financed today, or at least one of the ways is by product placement. And in that case, it helped to get another James Bond movie out. Okay. The kinetoscope parlor. Edison's kinetoscope, more like Dixon's kinetoscope, was designed for use in kinetoscope parlors, which contained only a few individual machines and permitted only one customer to view a very short 50-foot film at any one time. The first kinetoscope parlors contained 5 machines. For the price of about 25 cents or 5 cents per machine, customers moved from machine to machine to watch 5 different films or successive rounds of a famous prize fight, for example. So these kinetoscope parlors were places that were set up in cities all over the country, especially like San Francisco and New York and things like that. And these kinetoscopes would be set up, and in just a second you're going to see a kinetoscope parlor in San Francisco. There's one right there. This one was set up in 1894, 1895, somewhere around in there. But you can see these machines. And what you would do is you would walk in, you would give them a quarter or 5 cents per machine. And you can see these little eyepieces here. See those where my cursor is? And you would look down through the little eyepiece there and peer at a little teeny tiny film that was about no more than about 1.5 inches tall, 1.5 inches wide. And you would peer down in there, and you would watch this for a few seconds, and then when that was over, you would go to the next one, and so forth and so on. The entire experience was kind of like a peep show, and it was, I don't know, I would be really self-conscious if I was staring down into this machine and all these other guys over here were staring back at me, watching this. I mean, it was just kind of to me, it seems like a creepy experience. And quite honestly, guys, 25 cents in 1894 was a heck of a lot of money. So you've got a situation where this is going to be limited, these type amusements for the working man, for the man on the street. This is not going to be real affordable for the average working man. This is going to be, kind of a middle class type amusement at this point, because a quarter was a heck of a chunk of dough for a working man in 1894. So, now that Thomas Edison has his kinetoscopes, and he's just really proud of himself, even though Dixon invented the kinetoscope, and who's really mad about that at this point, rightfully so. Thomas Edison did do some incredible things. He created the world's very first film studio in New Jersey, and it's called the Black Maria. And the Black Maria was a big metal box, basically, as you can see there, with the riveted steel, and it's in this sort of bulky looking shape. But it was set down on top of a 360-degree track. And as they were shooting these films inside this hot box, is what it looks like. You'd put somebody in if you wanted to torture them. This film studio could actually be pushed and manipulated to capture light depending on what time of day you were shooting and where the position of the sun was. So you could allow for as much or as little light as you needed at any given time. But that list looks incredibly uncomfortable, and I would say during the summer trying to shoot a film in there would be like being in some prison camp in World War II or something. I mean, thrown into a hot box. So that doesn't look comfortable at all to me. But it's the very first film studio in the world, and is now still there in New Jersey, and one of the historic spots in our country. Okay, so what were some of the things that Edison did in the studio? Well, the very first copyrighted motion picture, and I say copyrighted, was called The Sneeze, and it was done by Edison in the Black Maria. And it's a guy by the name of Fred Ott who sneezes. It's an 1894 American short, black and white, silent documentary shot by W.K.L. Dixon and starring Fred Ott. It was the very first motion picture to be copyrighted in the United States, and it's not much, I promise you. In the 5-second film, one of Thomas Edison's assistants, Fred Ott, takes a pinch of snuff and sneezes. According to the Library of Congress, it was filmed for publicity purposes as a series of still photographs to accompany an article in Harper's Weekly. In 2015, the United States Library of Congress selected the film for preservation in the National Film Registry, finding it culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. So, are you ready? Here we go. From 1894, the world's very first copyrighted motion picture, The Sneeze. And this introduction from the Library of Congress was not part of it, I promise. So here you go.
From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that wasn't there. That's you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress.
I know that
Visit
doesn't
us
seem like
at
much, guys,
loc.gov.
but in 1894, that was a really big deal. I mean, you've got moving images, you've got, somebody on camera. This was huge. I mean, this was really next level technology, something that just absolutely blew people away. Here's another one that Edison shot, not so much in the Black Maria, but at least it looks like we've got a little an attempt at storytelling here, albeit one that only lasts a few seconds. The Execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, August the 28th, 1895, the Edison Laboratory. Now check this out. We've got some costumes. We've got even a little special effect here, as you'll see. Watch this. Boom! Of course, they've got to hold the head up. Ah! But anyway, that was super duper cool for people that wanted to go to a kinetoscope parlor and see some of these films. And you're getting the idea. These only last a few seconds. Here's another one, the Carmencita from 1894. This one was shot, as you can see here, in the Black Maria, 1894. So let's see the Carmencita. And this is inside that big metal hot box. There, of course, is no sound, completely silent. And there she is dancing, dancing, dancing. And that would have been quite provocative, folks, in 1894 and 1895. That would have been, something that, would have been considered quite risque. So there was that. Here's another one. Lower Falls, Grand Canyon, Yellowstone Park. Now, what I think is really cool about this one was shot in January of 1899. I think this is super cool, guys, because the average person would never get an opportunity to go to Yellowstone National Park. If you lived in a city or something, I mean, this might be the only chance you would ever get to see something like that. So in that regard, I think it's really, really cool, really neat that somebody for, a nickel could go and, peer into this kinetoscope. Well, if you pay 25 cents to get in, you could look at other things. But, that would be perhaps their only opportunity to see something like that. And I think that's really cool. I mentioned prize fights a minute ago. This was for the heavyweight championship of the world in 1894. And you could watch highlights from successive rounds of prize fights in these kinetoscope parlors. Check this out. Nice outfits there, guys. So there we go in this heavyweight championship of the world. And you got everybody watching. 126 years ago. Merciful heavens. It's been a long time. Check that out. So you would watch the kinetoscope, and you would watch that, and then you would go to highlights from another round, and then you could go brag to everybody.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress.
When I was growing up, you used to have to watch those things on, call your cable company and buy them pay-per-view. More interested in the sale of kinetoscopes for roughly $250 a piece to these parlors than in the films, which cost about $10 to $15 a piece that would be run in them, Edison refused to develop projecting technology, reasoning that if he made and sold projectors, then exhibitors would purchase only one machine, a projector, from him instead of several. Now, this is not a hard concept to understand. This is just basic economics. $250 is more than $10 to $15, right? So if you're Thomas Edison, you're going to be more interested in selling the kinetoscopes for exhibition than you are the film. So this is why we get the, Carmencita dance, and why we get Yellowstone, and why we get, these other things that only last a few seconds. He wasn't interested so much in the movies that were being shown in them. He was interested in making bank on these kinetoscopes themselves at $250 a piece. So people were like, hey man, why don't you develop a projecting kinetoscope, one that I could show, kind of like a smart board in the classroom, one that I could show on the smart board, and that way I would only have to buy one machine from you, and I could show it to dozens and dozens of people who could also watch. And Edison's like, well, that's not going to work. I can't do that, because then I'll just be, selling one machine, and then my market will shift to making movies at $10 to $15 a piece, and he wasn't interested in that. So he refused to develop the technology. Well, guess who's back and says, you know what? I'll do that. Any guesses out there as to who decided to step up and invent the projecting technology? Oh, revenge is a dish best served cold. Exhibitors wanting to maximize their profits, which they could do more readily by projecting a handful of films to hundreds of customers at a time rather than one at a time, and by charging 25 to 50 cents for admission, seemed to be more appealing to them. About a year after the opening of the first kinetoscope parlor in 1894, Showman, with the assistance of Edison's former assistant, W.K.L. Dixon, who's back and ready to seek revenge on his old boss, perfected projection devices that were used in vaudeville houses, legitimate theaters, local town halls, fairgrounds, amusement parks, etc., to show films to mass audiences. So Dixon invents the projecting kinetoscope after his old boss had taken a bow for inventing the plain old kinetoscope. With the advent of projection technology in 1885 through 1896, the motion pictures became the ultimate form of mass consumption. With the advent of projection, the viewer's relationship with the image was no longer private as it had been with peep show devices such as the kinetoscope. It suddenly became public experience that the viewer shared with up to hundreds of others. So you now had to go to the creepy kinetoscope parlor and look through that little tiny, window in the machine, and that was almost a dirty feeling. I mean, like you're a peeping Tom or something. And to make it even creepier, people were staring at you while they did that. So I can understand why they were upset. You were also looking at that tiny little image, The image the spectator viewed now expanded from the minuscule peep show dimensions of 1 or 2 inches to the life-size proportions of 6 to 9 feet. The spectator was no longer a peeping Tom looking guiltily through a keyhole, but now a voyeur whose activity was shared by a larger public. So now we've got these projecting kinetoscopes. And after Dixon invented the projecting kinetoscope, guess who decided he was going to put his out too? Thomas Edison. So Thomas Edison did invent a projecting kinetoscope. He called his the Vitascope. And you can see an advertisement for that here. Wonderful is the Vitascope. Pictures life-size and full of color. Makes a thrilling show. Well, not to say that these movies were in color, but some of the images were colored in by hand, and each cell, it was very time-consuming on the film. So, it was possible, but it was very laborious and took a great deal of time. Here you can see this advertisement, the Buffalo Express from 1897 up here. The Vitascope Theater, continuous exhibition from 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day, every Sunday, one price, 10 cents. Come anytime and see Edison's latest wonder, the improved Vitascope, the most perfect animated machine ever produced. And they tell you that pictures are going to change every Sunday and Thursday. Come and see Trotting Race at Charter Oak Park and The Bathers. Interesting. And 20 other lifelike views. And it says free admission to phonograph parlors. So you could go in and listen to the phonographs, which of course were sound only, for free. So here's an image of a projecting kinetoscope that Dixon invented. And then Edison, rode his coattails on that one too and invented his own projecting kinetoscope. And if you had big money, they did have a home version of a projecting kinetoscope. It is unequaled for home entertainment. The improved machine is now so simple that an amateur can operate it. The home kinetoscope projects both moving pictures and stereopticon slides on the screen. The mechanism is turned by hand. If electric current is not in your town or in your house, we give you the choice of other ways of making the light. Our catalogs give complete information and lists of moving pictures. So you can see here that they're manufactured in Orange, New Jersey, and you have a way to bring the kinetoscope to your home and entertain your family. That guy kind of looks like Teddy Roosevelt right there. Anyway. Okay, so from 1896 to roughly 1905, when the Nickelodeon era began, the audience that went to the movies in the United States was the same more or less middle-class audience. Although the audiences consisted of all socioeconomic classes, the cost of admission tended to exclude the lower classes. We talked about this a few moments ago. Working class laborers who worked 60 hours a week or more and earned less than $4 a week in 1900 could only attend on occasion. So you're talking about, those kinetoscope parlors, guys, for a quarter. That's a pretty big percentage of what you were bringing home a week in 1900. So the people that are going to be able to go to these are not from the working classes. They were middle class movements. And quite honestly, the super wealthy people sort of looked down on the kinetoscope parlors as, well, I don't need to go look through an image of Yellowstone Lower Falls. I'll just go to Yellowstone Lower Falls and see it for myself. So a lot of the upper class looked down on these kinetoscope parlors as sort of lowbrow for the masses, and just kind of like, ugh. So they were pretty much middle class amusements. The poor didn't have enough money to go see them. The rich thought it was, trash for the lowbrow, and the middle class were the only ones who really had the money to go on occasion. Early pre-1906 cinema stressed showing rather than telling. So it was exhibition in nature. Most films made in this period were actualities, which outnumbered fiction films until roughly 1906, when the percentage of story films began to increase dramatically and actualities less and less popular. By 1908, 96% of all American films were now telling stories. The institutionalization of the narrative, circle that word right there, as the primary category of American motion picture production marks the beginning of another stage in the development of the cinema as an institution. So guys, until roughly 1906, 1907, 1908, most films made prior to that, pre-1906 cinema, were actualities. They were like strong man lifting weights, or man wrestling alligator, or Annie Oakley taking target practice. They were exhibition in nature. Not a lot of money was spent on making these films, and you really couldn't tell much of a story in just a few seconds of film anyway. So they were exhibition in nature. But by 1908, almost all American films were now telling stories. So you go from exhibition and strongmen and wrestling alligators and things like that and dancing to actually trying to tell some semblance of a story. So the narrative now becomes the primary category of American motion picture production. All right. So once these movies evolved to start telling stories, where would people go to actually watch them? Well, Starting in 1905, theaters devoted exclusively to the showing of motion picture films began to pop up in virtually every city in the country. And they were called Nickelodeons. Yeah, it's not just a channel that my son watches SpongeBob on, which is literally on every TV in my home 24 hours a day. SpongeBob is on all the time on Nickelodeon. But yeah, that isn't just a TV channel. It's also what these theaters were called that showed films projected by kinetoscopes. And like I said, they start popping up in theaters all over the country, and they were really easy to throw together. You might have a hardware store in like downtown San Francisco that goes out of business. Well, the next day there might be a theater in there. All you needed was a few chairs, a screen, a projecting kinetoscope, and some advertisements, that didn't have to be real expensive, saying, "Hey, there's movies in here. Come watch them. You can come watch them for a nickel." You could go in and you could sit and you could watch the projecting kinetoscope. So referred to as Nickelodeons because the price of admission was initially only a nickel. These small 200-seat theaters were quickly installed in or near shopping or entertainment districts in former stores. The low cost of admission and the abbreviated length of the program attracted a new class of patrons whom previous and more expensive forms of popular entertainment had ignored. The working classes. So 25 cents to go to the kinetoscope parlor, not going to work for the poor. A nickel? Okay, now we're talking. If you're telling me I can get in the door of this Nickelodeon for a nickel and watch movies, now we're talking here. Yeah, so the Nickelodeon begins to unlock the possibilities of film for the working classes, for the masses. Okay? Nickelodeons began drawing the poorer elements of society, including recent immigrants, out of the ethnic, social life associated with their local neighborhoods into a more diversified public space, creating a new community of moviegoers. Now, I'm going to get super deep here with you guys, okay? Super deep. So I want you to imagine that in a Nickelodeon like this particular one was in Toronto, Canada, you've got all kinds of different social, cultural, and economic classes that are coming together. You've got immigrants, you've got other minorities, you've got all kinds of different peoples coming together, and they're sitting in front of the screens in albeit really uncomfortable chairs that were just kind of found, wherever. And you're watching the same movies. You're sharing that experience. Movies now become a shared experience. You are taking this in together. You're laughing at the same things. You're crying at the same things. You're feeling the same emotions. So where I'm going with this is this was a very homogenizing effect on the American people. Means to make the same. Homogeneous means to make the same. So these Nickelodeons were very homogenizing. I'll try to say that 5 times fast. Easier said than done. It helped to bring us together and helped to sort of Americanize recent immigrants and peoples that weren't from here to American culture, and helps to bring us together and create a shared American identity. Wow, that's deep, right? Here's another one. You can see the advertisements. Now open, 5 cents. And you can see here that these little banners, that probably did not cost a great deal of money, but this was probably like a drugstore or a hardware store that went out of business. And this movie theater, this Nickelodeon, just comes right in. And you can see these little, the little movie posters that are out here. So it's not like they had to spend a ton of money marketing. You're just like, hey, come watch movies in here for a nickel. And people did. A lot of people. Okay, so this is the very first Nickelodeon in the States. And you can see here, those seats do not look real comfortable. And, that screen is much bigger than the peep show of the old kinetoscope. But, that just does not look real comfortable to me. And, if you're the dude or whoever sitting right here in this seat, I don't know if y'all can see my cursor, that is going to really stink because you have no way of seeing, what's going on here. So Again, it's not like a lot of time and effort went into catering to the comforts of the consumers of these movies. But again, this is going to fill up with all kinds of different peoples, immigrants, minorities, working class peoples, and even the middle class, and sometimes the wealthy people, not always, but sometimes. So this is a way to help bring us together, helping to create a common American culture. As the popularity of the Nickelodeons increased and the movie-going audience expanded, these theaters began to serve as the site for the creation of a homogeneous, there's that word again, middle-class American culture. As a writer for Harper's Magazine noted on visiting a Nickelodeon in 1913, once the various members of the ethnically, socially, and economically diverse audience had taken their seats, they became part of a single crowd, caught up in dreamlike images on the screen. So they sort of came together. Right. Cleaning up the benefits of respectability. The film industry was becoming more and more stable. By 1908, which is where the transition comes, where you're now telling stories more often than you're exhibiting movies, the major film producers began banding together to form the Motion Picture Patents Company, or Edison's MPPC, which sought to control all aspects of motion picture production, distribution, and exhibition. Now, key word here, all aspects. Now, from those of you that have taken history classes before, or have been through U.S. history classes with myself or Coach Jones or whoever, or if you just knew this in general, what do we call a company that controls literally everything, like all of one particular industry? Wait time. Oh, that's right, a monopoly. So Edison's MPPC, the Motion Picture Patents Company, was a monopoly which sought to control all aspects of motion picture production, distribution, and exhibition, meaning how they were made, where the movies themselves went, or what cities they were shown in, and how they were shown. Well, that's called a monopoly. And for those of you with any background in American history at all, you know that during the Progressive Era, the word monopoly was a bad word. And you had presidents like Teddy Roosevelt and Taft and Woodrow Wilson that busted up monopolies using things like the Sherman Antitrust Act to go after big companies like ultimately Standard Oil and others that controlled all of an industry. So guess what? They've now got a target on their back. They are a monopoly, which was a really bad word during the Progressive Era. The MPPC worked to improve the content of motion pictures and conditions of theaters. To court middle-class audiences, exhibitors also became more respectable. Producers joined the program to uplift the movies by making films that appealed to a higher clientele, meaning Edison and his bunch at the MPPC were like, how can we get more people to come to the movies? Because what we've been doing is only attracting, a certain type. How can we get more classy people and more educated people to come to the movies? Well, we can start telling stories that are more in line with middle class and educated taste, meaning let's turn classic works of literature into films. Let's take stories from the Bible and make them into films. Let's do something that will appeal to a higher clientele. And so they'll want to come to the movies to see, the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet or something. Okay? So producers engaged in self-censorship to control any content of pictures that might prove offensive to middle-class tastes, meaning let's make sure that we don't make crap so that educated people will want to come and watch movies too. So in an attempt to appeal to middle-class sensibilities, they began drawing more and more on the classics to make their movies and tell their stories. As we said, prior to 1908, the source material for movies had come from newspaper headlines, vaudeville and burlesque routines, political cartoons, fairy tales, and popular songs. Between 1907 and 1911, Vitagraph released more than 50 films based on literary, historical, or biblical sources. Filmmakers began to adapt the works of Edgar Allan Poe, Charles Dickens, Leo Tolstoy, Victor Hugo, and William Shakespeare. And now we finally start to see some other folks show up to the movies to go watch some of these classic works of literature brought to life on the screen in front of them. Trying to class the movie industry up a little bit. Now, ultimately, Edison's MPPC is going to be busted up, as I said, by the Sherman Antitrust Act as a monopoly, and the studio system, which we're going to be talking about relatively soon, pops up to sort of fill that vacuum left by the MPPC. So while early American cinema had been exhibitionist in nature, content with showing attractions, subsequent or post-1908 American cinema became more and more intent on the perfection of narrative skills, i.e. things like telling the story of Shakespeare. In adapting more complex story material to the screen, filmmakers were forced to upgrade their abilities as storytellers. Okay? So we've reached the end of our presentation here, but let me tell you where this is going. As we start telling stories on the screen, we're telling stories in one-reel films. And these one-reel films lasted anywhere from about 12 to 15 minutes. Now, can you tell a real complicated story, like character development, plot development? Can you get real deep in 12 to 15 minutes? Well, obviously no. So one of the things that we're going to see, Americans always want bigger. They always want better. They want the newest, the latest, greatest iPhone. They want, the latest, greatest technology. And so moviegoers say, you know what? That was really great. We really enjoyed this movie, but it would be nice if it was longer than 12 minutes. So you're going to start hearing calls for not only longer movies, multiple reel films instead of one reel, but also more comfortable places to watch them. Are you really going to sit in that awful-looking Nickelodeon for, 2 hours? No. You're not going to sit there and watch those great big long films. What you're going to want are cushier, nicer places to watch them, more comfortable places to watch the bigger, longer films. So what we are going to do here is go from, the one-reel film to bigger, better, more complicated narratives. Well, I hope that you guys took something from this today, and we have literally just scratched the surface of film studies, but I wanted to kind of introduce how movies were born, what early movies looked like, and give you some idea of where we are going here. And up next, we are going to be watching a little documentary called The World Discovers a New Art Form, and then watch The Great Train Robbery, which is a one-reel film that just lasts 13, 14 minutes, somewhere around in there, so you can get an idea of what one of these one-reel films looks like. By Edwin S. Porter. I think you'll really enjoy it. So until next time, I love you guys and hope you have a happy day.